Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 21st Annual NAB Wrap-Up, sponsored by HBO. And we're very pleased to be their guests. Thank you. I'm Jeff Cohen, your chair for the New York section. And this evening we have some dignitaries with us. We have Bill Miller, the membership director, vice president at SMPTE. And we have John Furter, our section governor. Thank you. And we can go to the next slide. Oh, I have a clicker. Green button. Okay. Technology. Ah, there we go. There, that's me. Okay. I think there's some latency in this circuit. There we go. Okay, so the first announcement is, of course, we just completed our section elections. And just for the record, Ken, Berenice, and Michael, thank you for your service in this last period of managership. And Greg, Tim, and Mark continue on for their second year. And then, of course, I'm continuing on as chair. John Cerconi, thank you very much, continuing on as secretary-treasurer. And then a big hand for Stuart, Rose, and Mike, who are new managers. Mike, of course, has been through this before, but Stuart and Rose are brand new. Stuart's here, if you want to raise your hand. And Rose was not able to join us. She's on the road. I think she's in Indianapolis tonight. But I do want to mention that, you know, the Board of Managers is about a dozen people who help guide this section. And there are something like 6 people who are actually elected members, and then there's the chair and the past chair, and those are the actual voting members. But in real practice, you don't have to be an elected board member to participate. So I encourage anybody here who has any interest in helping us guide the section, and that means helping to do the many things that need to be done, like running the holiday party and running these meetings and producing these meetings. But also, for instance, at the very next meeting in June, we'll be planning next year's agenda. We'll be coming up with all the annual meeting topics, and we'll be having a lively discussion about that and making those plans. So if you want to participate in that, feel free to get involved. Reach out to any member of the Board of Managers.
Subsection chairs?
Yes.
Continued?
Yeah. Oh, did we?
Not.
You know, I think I kind of accidentally whacked the third slide. But yeah, our subsection chairs have continued on, both in Long Island and Connecticut. So Brian Kobolars with Wes Simpson, and then Ray Blumenthal, and who is the second person on Long Island? Good question. Rich Torpy, I think it is, yeah. Yeah, so there you have it. Okay. So that was my pitch for joining our Board of Managers. And then if you do it for a while, you can run for office and, you know, go through that cycle as well. All right. The June meeting, as you see before you, will be Wednesday, June 7th. Mike Strine and Wes Simpson are producing, and we'll be talking about video over IP and HDR as the main topics. This meeting is being not only video teleconference to 2 different HBO locations, one on Long Island at Hop Hog, another in Hollywood, but also being streamed live on YouTube. Don't everybody start going to their YouTube page in the room right now, but it is there live on YouTube right now, and it will also be archived there for future viewing. SMPTE-NY is the channel. Alrighty. And then lastly, at every meeting, I've been making a pitch for your own businesses to sponsor the section. So whether you're a broadcaster or an equipment manufacturer or any service provider in our industry, your company is qualified to be a friend of SMPTE New York. Once again, we're trying to be financially self-sustaining and no longer dependent upon the national headquarters for our funding. So if you go to the website, which is SMPTE-NY.org, it's an easy sign up. It's just a few $100s. There are two different categories for small business or larger business. I think it's $300 and $500. And the benefits are many and ongoing, and we would really appreciate your support. All right. At this time, I'm going to toss to Tim Dwight, who is producing the meeting this evening. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to see all of you again for, I think this is probably about the 5th year that I've been producing this meeting. It looks like we have a great turnout, so thank you very much for coming. As Jeff mentioned, this meeting is being recorded, and here's our recording notice. And there it went. Who wants to read all that? We have a meeting to do. So again, we're having this live video conference with the SMPTE New York Long Island subsection via HBO and Hauppauge, and also HBO internally in their Los Angeles office. The meeting producer, Tim Dwight, as Jeff mentioned. Raymond Blumenthal is the chair of the Long Island subsection, and Rich Torpy is the co-producer of the Long Island part of the meeting. So first, some thank yous. Jenny Montalbano, all of these people of HBO, Rachel Schiffman, Ted Morano, and Anthony DeVello, who's given a big hand. Thank you very much. You all made this meeting possible, so you guys are great. And Mark Foreman, this is, I think, the 11th time or so that you have been, yes, 11? Something like that. The 11th slideshow that he's been so generously providing us with its beautiful pictures at NAB at this venue. So thank you, Mark. A big hand of applause for Mark Foreman. Thank you. So I'll briefly introduce our panelists in that order. They'll be seated during the Q&A session. It's Chris Chinnock, President of Insight Media, David Leitner, Cinematographer, Marilyn Pierce, Director of Engineering at Fox News, and Mark Schubin. And there'll be a Q&A session, of course, moderated by me after the presentations. So first up is Chris. Please come to the podium and take it away. He's coming. And Ted, the projectionist, will get his slides and everyone's slides ready shortly. So here's the forward button.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, well, thank you and good evening. Actually, a little bit of trivia while I was getting in the projection booth earlier, getting mic'd up. I found there was a relic up there. It's called a film projector. Yes, a Christie film projector, and it's been 2 years since it was been used. And the last film that ran here, I'm told, was The Shining. So I thought that was a fitting way to go out. So I'm going to talk about light fields and professional monitors. So first of all, a kind of a question. Who among you is kind of maybe a little confused or doesn't quite understand light field capture and light field displays? A good bit. Well, I'm with you guys. I'm still learning a lot about this. It's a pretty complex topic. So, and I'm not going to try and explain exactly how it all works. Just don't have time for that. But we'll try and give you a little bit of a kind of a highlights of what happened at NAB. So one of the things that was mentioned, and this was actually a combination of talks that were given at the Future of Cinema event that was SMPTE sponsored prior to NAB, as well as some things that were at NAB itself. But one of the things I want to be clear about light field activity is there's a lot going on in terms of standardizations. MPEG-I has got multiple groups looking at this, multiple subgroups looking at this, as well as the JPEG Plano group. So the MPEG group is kind of looking more at how you can create virtual viewpoints. So in other words, if you have multiple camera arrays, either around in a circle or in a sphere or some arbitrary 2D configuration, how do you create a camera view that's not in a physical camera location? And so they're trying to understand how you can create data sets that are kind of the minimum data sets to do that. And so what's the separation between these cameras and those kinds of activities. And then the JPEG Plano group is really looking at how you then can compress that and develop streaming solutions or some other transport mechanisms, because light field data has a lot of bandwidth. So I mean, think of it as, you know, dozens or even hundreds of cameras and video feeds. So how do you manage that? One of the bigger news, at least that I thought, from NAB was the launch of this company called Lightfield Labs. This is headed by three guys from the Litro Cinema group. Some of you who were at NAB last year were at that Litro Cinema debut, where they showed their enormous, I think 7 or 8 foot long light field camera system, and they've developed a whole production workflow for that now. And now some of these executives have spun off to create this new company. And they're not focused on the capture part. They're going to kind of leave that to Litro and others. What they want to do is say, okay, we've got this huge data set. How do we process this information? How do we manage this information? How do we format this information? How do we deliver some kind of compressed version of that to a display, to an end user? And more importantly, where's the light field displays? So they're working that part of the chain, which is still a significant part of the ecosystem. And to be clear, there's some very rudimentary light field displays out there right now, but these are not kinds of products that you can buy today in general. Again, there's some very rudimentary things, but what light field displays, light field labs, and others are working on will be much more sophisticated than what's out there today. So on their roadmap, they have a very small 3 by 5 inch prototype. They want to have done Q1 next year. 150 megapixels resolution, and trying to define the specs for light field display is also really difficult. So when they say 150 megapixels, that's kind of like one plane. But the whole advantage of a light field display is you can look around multiple ways, up and down, and get completely different views in all these different orientations and perspectives. And each of those has 150 megapixels in just this initial proof of concept display. Where they're going are monitor and TV size displays of a flat panel based architecture that's going to have multiple gigapixels per plane. So you kind of get the idea here. There's going to be a lot of data and information here. So how to a lot to capture, a lot to compress and transmit, a lot to display. There was also a fair amount of talk about light field workflows. So one of the more active companies is a company called Otoy, and they've got a bunch of the pieces of this workflow. Actually, let's talk about the capture part of this. There's kind of two, let's call it two categories or two classes of capture. One you might call the inside out. So these are like VR spherical cameras that have multiple arrays that are kind of centrally located looking out into the world. And the other is the outside in. So you can have an array of cameras around a central area, or a 2D array of those. It can be in multiple configurations. So that's the outside in looking kind of application. And Otoy has a partnership with the ETC Entertainment Technology Center in LA at the, I guess the University, USC, I think, USC. And they have they call the light stage. So this is literally a stage that's surrounded by a lot of lights and a lot of cameras, and you can put a subject in there and you can now capture video of the action in multiple perspectives. So, I mean, this kind of stuff has been done in Hollywood for some time, but now it wants to be, they want to move this more into mainstream applications, and the key mainstream application for this is going to be virtual reality. So they're working now with Facebook. Facebook has 2 new camera systems, and they're going to be working to use that acquired captured information from those cameras to process it. They have a whole cloud rendering and processing capability, and then they have this Octane rendering engine. So you have all this light field data, but you don't deliver that light field data today. It all gets rendered down basically to stereoscopic pairs and is delivered in a more conventional manner. That's where we're at today because we don't have the light field displays. That's part of the problem. So it's kind of an interim step, if you will. Fraunhofer has also been in this field for a while. They also have multiple camera systems and a whole processing workflow and architecture, and they kind of laid out this little flow chart here. They call it RealCeption. It's a plugin for Nuke. So these are kind of tools that VFX and other post-production folks would have familiarity with. So you can start to create these kinds of, use these assets to create more conventional outputs. And then I mentioned Litro earlier. They weren't really very visible at NAB. They had a suite, but I didn't get to them, so I can't give you any updates on them. I mentioned Lightfield Labs also is interested in this, this whole formatting and pipeline part of it. And the bandwidths are absolutely enormous here. So you have to find a way to compress it or to encode it in some way. And so you want to find a way that does this, that when you deliver these light field data sets, really, and they may not be images, they may be data sets is the right way to think about this, that you can maintain transparency of images, that you can render specular highlights that move as you move your head appropriately, that have accurate edges, that have reflections and refractions, that have no artifacts and accurate depth, and all the things that you want to see in a high fidelity image. And this little graphic on the right here is part of his presentation where he showed a number of techniques of how to encode and compress and format this light field data. And it was a little animation that kind of moved around this character here, so you could get different perspectives and see how well it was rendering transparencies and edges and speculars and whatnot. And so he had I think he said 137 camera array as a ground truth reference, and then he compared various formatting techniques and played them back just so you could see, what was the quality of these various formatting techniques. And some of them were not very good, obviously. And so what they're proposing is kind of a hybrid approach where instead of having this very dense array of cameras, which is obviously a lot of data, that you can use a sparse array of cameras and then create a 3D model from that. And there are a lot of ways to create that 3D model. And then you can basically add textures, the video textures from the camera, plus material properties. And material properties here is very important because now all this stuff goes into a big game engine, basically, for the rendering of this. And if you have the material properties, as you move your head, these material properties can react to the lighting appropriately, which is exactly what you want, which gives you that realism. So that's what they're going to be working on, one of the things. So I mentioned this volumetric capture, this outside-in kind of architecture, and there was a lot of inside-out, a lot of spherical cameras. I'm not even going to try and talk about those. You hear about a new one every day on those. But these are a little bit different. I know about stages at Microsoft, 8i, Fraunhofer, HHI, the ETC Otoy, and Digital Domain. This picture on the upper right is from the Microsoft stage, and the lower one is from a company called 4D Replay. So I know you've seen the results of some of this before. If you think about some sporting matches where all of a sudden, the action freezes and the camera spins all around and you can see the shot from all kinds of multiple angles. Well, that's captured with having literally cameras all around the stadium. Now, they can't process that replay in real time, but it's still it's a replay technique now. But that's the idea of this outside-in capture. And so companies like 4D Replay kind of do this for the sporting venues and others. So this whole concept of this volumetric capture. I had never seen it talked about at NAB, and the people were talking about it this year. They were also talking about light fields this year, and that for the second time, last year being kind of the first time with Leitro's entree. So you can see that, you know, this topic is becoming more popular. It's still, you know, cutting edge, obviously. But all right, switching gears, professional monitors. There's going to be a whole crop of new 2,000 nit HDR reference monitors coming. Hitachi, Panasonic, TV Logic, Flanders Scientific, and Ikegami are all going to have their own versions based on a panel, actually a dual panel solution from Panasonic. What this is literally two 4K panels in parallel with a dual modulation technique. So if one panel has 1,000-to-1 contrast, which is typical of an LCD panel, and the other one has 1,000-to-1 contrast, those contrasts multiply. That's how you get to 1,000,000 to 1. And it's on pixel by pixel basis. So one pixel can be black, the other one can be 1,000,000 times as bright. That's amazing. So 2,000 nits is kind of the next frontier. Most of the professional grading monitors and reference monitors for HDR today are around 1,000 nits. But people and then the other exception are the Dolby monitors that are at 4,000 nits. There's not many of those. So this is kind of now a step in between at 2,000 nits. And so you'll see, you know, those a bunch of those coming toward the end of this year, early next year. EZO's going to use that same dual panel architecture, but theirs is only going to be 1,000 nits for whatever reason. Canon will also have a 2,000 nit, but it's not based on that dual panel architecture. So you can see everyone kind of wants to get into this grading monitor game, and these are going to be, you know, expensive $25,000, $30,000 monitors, okay, with almost full P3 coverage and, of course, support for HLG and PQ. But there are also going to be a lot of needs for other HDR monitors. You're going to need these for editing, for on-site review, for quality purposes, for making sure your content plays properly on various consumer platforms. And so there were a bunch of other things that were announced. Flanders Scientific, TV Logic, both showing 55-inch OLED-based displays. Now these are basically based on the LG panel, but they've, and I think for the most part, similar electronics, but they've added professional features to this, 12G SDI, 3D LUTs, and that kind of thing. And they probably will be a lot more expensive. Panasonic is also another example of a 65-inch OLED now that's based on a TV platform, which is not going to be for sale in the US. This will be for sale in Europe and Canada, but it will not be distributed as a TV in the US. However, you can buy this as a professional monitor, again with these same kind of professional features. Dell has introduced a 1,000 nit monitor and a 27-inch range for, again, for editing and quality control kinds of purposes. It's UHD certified, but the price point's now getting much more reasonable, $2,000. HP has one that's going to be about $4,000 at 31-inch, and Canon has a 17-inch. But that's only about 300 nits, while the HP one is 250 nits. Again, these are not going to be grading monitors. These are more for checking signals, for checking fidelity, and making sure this is an in-process, or it could be an editing monitor for that matter too. Okay, but there's a need for a lot of these kinds of things throughout the chain. And I'm going to stop right there. Thank you.
Okay, so as Ted, the projectionist, is getting the next stack of slides ready, I'm going to read you David Leitner's bio while we're doing that. So David Leitner is an Oscar-nominated producer and Emmy-nominated DP with over 80 credits in feature-length dramas and documentaries, including 8 Sundance Film Festival premieres. As director of new technology at Duart Film and Video in the 1980s, he was responsible for innovations in optical printing, camera and lens testing, film-to-tape transfer, and the introduction of Super 16 in the U.S. Later that decade, he spent a year at NASA's Johnson Space Center, restoring 16mm lunar footage to 35mm. He is also an author, Kodak's creating better video with 16mm film, tech columnist, and industry consultant on camera and lens design. So following David will be Marilyn Pierce. And Marilyn writes, "My career in television began at the Dallas County Sheriff's Jail." I don't know about you, but that's very impressive to me. I received a CETA grant to work on the in-house cable system for the inmates. It was an eye-opening experience for someone fresh out of high school. From there, I moved to GTE Southwest doing installs and repairs. I learned how to endure winters hanging from telephone poles and ensuring customer satisfaction. I returned to television as a master control operator at my local PBS station in Dallas, where I learned the secret to my success. Read the manuals. I was able to learn the interconnection of systems and signal flow. I was then able to move from Dallas to Washington, D.C., London, England, and then here in New York. Each step learning more and more about how not only television systems are connected, but also how people and systems interact to bring projects to completion. And then finally, when Mark is up, multiple Emmy Award-winning SMPTE Fellow Mark Schubin tries to make pictures look good on cinema, TV, and household screens. So, it looks like it's time for David Leitner. If you agree, please come to the podium.
I was going to say if you'll have me. Thank you for that. Tim was.
There's a forward button.
Thank you. Tim was tap dancing a little bit because I was having problems with video playback, but it's solved, so we're good. You live by technology, you die by technology. Now, before I get started, I have one public service announcement. Is anyone missing their cell phone? Because Jenny downstairs, who was checking everyone in, said someone left a cell phone. You sure? Going once? Going twice? You sure? You've all got yours. It's not an iPhone. It's a Samsung. You can have them. I'm going to leave this with Tim, and if you change your mind, find Tim afterwards.
And I might upgrade from my 5S.
There you go. Okay. Well, I was trying to figure out how many NABs I've been to. It's between 20 and 25. I'm not in Mark Schubin's league, and I'm not in Larry Thorpe's league. I was at dinner with Larry, an NAB, his 50th NAB. No one's going to really compete with that. Let's see. Postcards from the Future of Production. Okay. Now, I'm not assuming that everyone in this room was at NAB, and I'm not assuming that everyone watching this knows what NAB even looks like. I mean, it's 3 initials, it's a bit abstract. So I'm going to give you a really quick tour of what NAB is like. You start out at the Las Vegas Convention Center, and before I Can someone in the back bring my pack down? It's right behind. I have a laser pointer I forgot to bring down. Unless there's one here, it would be really helpful. Yeah, it's right there in that corner. Thanks, Michelle. If you could just bring it down. So this is the Las Vegas Convention Center. Hold on to that thought. Yes, right here. And it's 4 massive halls. Sure, actually. Thank you. 4 massive halls. Whoever this is, thank you very much. Okay. On Central Hall, North Hall, and the 2 South Halls. And this is what Central Hall looks like. Central Hall is where most of the production equipment is, cameras, dollies, lighting, lenses, things like that. That's where most of us in production head first and spend most of our time. It can get kind of rowdy, kind of crazy. This poor soul over here is seeking shelter from the storm. I totally understood that. This is the North Hall. In North Hall, there's broadcasting. This year there was VR. NHK typically has its HK Theater right there. It's a different crowd. It's no less interesting. South Hall, upper. South Hall is so massive it has an upper and a lower hall. Upper hall, people like Avid. I thought this was particularly interesting because Ericsson was bragging about transforming television, but this little stand over here is doing it. Sorry. So they own YouTube. South Hall, lower, is where all the cool kids hang out. There's Black Magic Design. You can music industry people back here. Now South Hall is where all the kind of cool stuff happens. You only see this in South Hall in the lower. You only see this kind of thing, and you only see this kind of thing, which is guys just jamming. I've seen that every year. I don't know why. It's always in the South Hall. Now, there are pavilions, campuses, studios, theaters, and parks. Don't know why, but that's how it's organized. Some of them are full, most of them aren't. Most of us have better things to do, but they do it every year. It's just part of the landscape. Now, Saturday, I'm going to tell you what Saturday and Sunday amount to. Saturday is the Future Cinema Conference, which the previous speaker referenced. Here's an example of what's discussed. Here's a paper that was given, which is particularly interesting. That's Saturday. Sunday is press conferences. These press conferences used to be deluxe. They used to be held in giant halls, massive amounts of food, lots of bling and stuff. I mean, the fanciest projectors you can imagine. Not anymore. As of about last year and this year, they're stuffed into these, you wouldn't know this, but these are little conference rooms at the convention center. This panoramic makes it look much bigger than it is. It was not. Sony didn't even rent a room for their press conference. They held it on the show floor. So you can see people over here milling about, people over here trying to attend. Sunday is the colorist mixer, which I always go to. I've been grading films since there was reversal and CC filters and all that back in the 70s. So I've been at this a long time. I always go to this. It's the 5th annual, and it was held way the heck up in the top of the Stratosphere Tower. That explains that background. That's not a special effect. Here you can see it. It's vertiginous. It really is. But there's more. You can go up to the roof, and you can lean over the roof. You think colorists are mild-mannered and meek? And there is no safety net. And that's a line to get on that contraption. Not for me. I'm not a roller coaster person. Now, on the way home, because Las Vegas is Las Vegas, I took some snapshots walking back to the hotel, because this is the color that we expect in Las Vegas. It wouldn't be Las Vegas otherwise. Now, up here, you may not be able to tell, but these bullet holes, all those neons have gone out, because somebody hasn't maintained this beautiful sign. And of course, it's the world's largest gift shop. We all know this place if we've been to Vegas. I don't know what this guy was exuberant about, but so that was my first weekend, my only weekend there. And then there are 4 days of exhibitions, Monday through Thursday. Thursday's like a half day. So the exhibition opens Monday morning, and we get there, and this is the South Hall, and there's this gigantic image of something that Blackmagic Design, which likes to cover buildings with their advertisements, they put this up. Now, what is this? That's what everybody was asking. Well, what it is a Fairlight console. This is like a 3.5 bay console, that's a 5 bay console, audio mixing. Why was that graphic up on the side of the South Hall? Well, that's because, that's a closer look, Blackmagic bought Fairlight. And they not only bought Fairlight, they incorporated all of Fairlight's code into DaVinci Resolve. Meaning that you have a Fairlight mixer inside the next version of DaVinci Resolve, which they call 14. They skipped 13, I wonder why. That was announced at the show. This is kind of astonishing. I mean, that used to be a color correction grading program, then it became an editing program, now it's an audio mixing program. It's kind of extraordinary. Now, equally extraordinary is the fact that they goosed the performance 10 times. I'm pretty sure that had to do with memory usage. I'm a heavy DaVinci user. And they did something else remarkable. They dropped the price from $1,000 down to $300. They're doing away with the dongle. No more dongle. Now, I thought that was a big deal, and that will reverberate through the production world in a really big way. If you're wondering if one program should be doing all these different specialized functions, the answer is probably not, nor should one person, but imagine the facility that has DaVinci Resolve all throughout it for audio mixing, for color grading, for editing. Imagine how easy it is to pass files around. It's kind of brilliant. Now, as long as I'm on Blackmagic Design, this was their 4.6K mini, Ursa Mini camera a year ago, and that's what it became as of about a month before NAB. They added this ENG-style series of toggles and dials and whatnot. You recognize that, it's conventional. They also added an interface, operator interface, that looks like it's from a digital cine camera on the side. They've kept everything else, same sensor, same form factor. But they added one thing that wasn't obvious, and Grant Petty, the CEO, had to announce it. They added Bluetooth. So now you can control that camera via Bluetooth. They're releasing the code publicly in the APIs. You can write your own apps. And he showed an example of what an app might look like, total camera control of that inexpensive little camera. Now, Canon came out with the C700, which is their go-to camera for production. They're hoping to take on episodic television, feature production, and whatnot. These are two different setups for it. It's a 4K camera, obviously. It can have a EF mount or a PL mount. It can also have one of two sensors. They're going to introduce a version of this with a global sensor, which will be on a PL mount version of the camera. And at their service centers, they say you can exchange sensors if you want, and you can exchange the mounts. So they're making this as versatile as possible. They had Kodak's design a RAW recorder for the back of it, and it's a pretty interesting camera. It has ACES IDTs in it. It's pretty well thought out. Now, this is Panasonic's Vericam, and they introduced not long ago something called the Vericam Pure. And what that is another codex recorder right here, which connects directly to the camera, the Vericam 35. It's the exact same camera as this, but this center unit has just been lifted out and tossed to the side. What do they need it for? You can see that this control panel is on a little rod sticking up here. Look how small that is. This was met with a lot of applause. A lot of people like smaller cameras. That's a lesson to camera manufacturers. With this thing, you add a brick battery on the end of that and the other junk, and it starts to become a bazooka. So that was a big hit. We all like that. This was the Scion camera at Aja. They didn't mention Scion once in their press conference. None of their literature mentioned it. These guys are using this as a stand to lean on. Don't know what that means. We're back to Panasonic. They introduced a mystery camera. They're playing that game again. This is going to be debuted at Cinegear, which is in June, which is not long from now. They showed you this silhouette, which looks kind of vaguely Sony FS5-ish. They showed you this. They said all this. Now, my speculation, because a friend of mine was really excited about this camera. He seemed to be under a non-disclosure agreement. I don't know. He didn't hint. He didn't say a thing. I could be completely wrong. But somebody's going to come out with an inexpensive full-frame motion picture camera. It's imminent. Who gets there first? Maybe these guys. I don't know. Could be. Oops. Now, if you want to shoot motion pictures using a full frame, you can use the Sony A9 that just came out. Some of you may know what this is. It's a backside illuminated full frame sensor. It's pretty kick-ass. It can shoot 20 frames of RAW a second. Now, it can't do it endlessly, but still, that's quite an accomplishment. That's full frame. This is another full frame camera. This is from a company called Red. I'm showing you this white limited edition Droid edition because Red ghosted NAB. They weren't there. They didn't come. See, ghost white. Okay. I'm waiting for the groan. Thank you. Now, what's going on with cameras, and this is one of the takeaways I want you to get tonight, is that large sensors are upon us, and they're upon us in a big way. And I'm not sure that most people are really aware of that. They think a big sensor is a Super 35 size sensor. No, it isn't. Going forward into the future, a Super 35 size sensor is going to be considered a small sensor because what is coming are the full frame 8 perf, that's what I call 8 perf, but full frame. That's the Sony A9 I just showed you. Super 35, that's in the center. Look how tiny that's beginning to look. The Red Dragon, which was announced, 2 years ago, is an 8K. The VV is, they say it does not mean VistaVision. The 8K is this size, the green. And here's the Arri 65, which is basically 3 Arri 11 sensors turned side to side and joined together. That's why it's called an AX3 sensor, this big thing. But it works really well, and it's really big. So if you were a lens designer, and you're designing lenses to take you into the next decade, what size sensor are you going to design your lenses for? Well, this is the Red Dragon sensor, the 8K VV. It's in a Panavision camera, the DXL, which was shown last year at Cinegear, last June. But it's a collaboration, the camera, between Panavision, Red, and Light Iron, who supply the color science. Pretty big sensor, pretty big lens mount. This is what it looks like from the side. You wouldn't say it's a Red because it has a Red sensor, but it has Red DNA in it. And you see the Panavision handle that folds over the back. It's kind of typical. Okay. Now, here's another camera that I thought was just a stunning feat of technology. This is the Arri SXT-W, and the W stands for wireless. You see these antennae right here? It's like a forest of antennae. Look at what, there's 5 of them actually when it's fully configured. There is a Wi-Fi radio transmitter inside this thing. It's for color correction. There's another transmission that allows this controller. This isn't just controlling focus, this is controlling all the setup of the camera. It's a WCU unit from Arri. And then there's a third wireless frequency and system that allows you to use up to 4 monitors, picture monitors with time code, audio. Imagine, with no delay, they claim. So that's pretty stunning. In fact, this whole package is not only wireless, but free of the it's almost cableless because all the auxiliary power you need to run those autonomous transformers and all the other junk that you encrust these cameras with, if it can be wirelessly sent, this can do it. So this is clearly a camera of the future. Now, they also showed their master grips. Now, there's a grip on this side right here and a grip on this side. But look at the top of this. There's something weird on the top right here. And this is what it looks like. And it looks like the face of a Samsung wearable smartwatch, which it might be, I'm not sure. But it does stuff. Watch this. Okay, I'm recording.
So,
focus and decrease. Focus. System. This would be recording. Then if you want to see what this is, you have zoom. You want to change the user setting, you hold it, and then you can select different user buttons, or you can turn it off if you wanted to. So, same with the system. You want to go in here, you hold the button, you change the language, the brightness. I'm going to change the brightness. Okay, so it is set to maximum. So, get out. And usually there's also the focus indication in here, but for some reason it doesn't work right now. Then it shows the focus value. Now you change the ratio of the ring. And that's pretty much it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ari, for bringing us into the 21st century. Let's see. Now, the last speaker also spoke about VR and 360-degree cameras, or at least 360-degree cameras. They were everywhere. I'm not going to go much into any detail here. It's a lot to take. It's hard enough to understand one camera. I struggle with that, and I've been doing this all my professional career. I can't understand that many cameras. Boggles my mind. Anyway, you can see all these different setups, all these different things going on. In some cases, they're trying to capture a 360-degree circle. In some cases, it's a sphere that they're trying to capture. This is a bunch of Canon C300s. I don't want to think about what that cost. These are small Blackmagic cameras. These, believe it or not, let's see if I have a close-up. These are Arri Minis. What the? And they have glass filters in front of the lenses. I mean, imagine the guy that forgot one of the filters on one of the cameras. Now, basically, it's trying to do something like this. And again, no comment. Now, this is one of the weirdest things I found. Look at this carefully. You see that this is a helmet? Let this soak in. And these are, you put cameras in here. See these, all right? Is it soaking in what this is? Oh no, not for me. Hello. Now, you also know, if you've seen me give these talks before, that I make fun of kind of ridiculous camera gear to hold up tiny cameras that don't need it. This is from Matthews, and I'm holding it out there, and it's for your iPad or your iPhone. But look at what this guy's doing right here. I can't hold my iPhone up in the air with my arm. I have to put all this is a lot of aluminum. It's a lot of CNC stuff and machining, and I don't know. These guys, he has a little tiny Nikon. I'm not sure why he needs all of this rigging for that small camera. It's probably a C300 that he's got there. I really don't understand this. Now, this stuff gets valorized and made heroic by this kind of advertising. Like, look how rugged he is. He's got that, like, several day growth of beard. It takes 3 guys down here on this Ronin, 3 people to operate it, 3 people. These guys are just kind of having fun, but he said, the heck with it, and just stuck it on his shoulder, which is where it belongs. This one takes the cake. I can't say much about this. It kind of speaks for itself. I mean, it might be your cup of tea. There's always one of these people. Look at the expression on his face. What is this even doing? Is it an eyeball looking back at him? And why is it on a rod? Okay. So lenses, the latest in lenses. These are all Super 35 lenses. You may recognize some of them if you're 80 years old. They were great in their day. They're so great that they're getting rebarreled, as you know. This is a Cooke Speed Panchro, and this is the real deal, by the way, which I saw at a stand at NAB. And this is what Cooke has just done. They have just brought back. They reverse engineered the Panchro, rebuilt it, put it in a modern barrel, modern lens mount, and look at that. It's kind of wow. Now, here's another fad you may have encountered. It's taking the anti-reflective coatings off of lenses. This is an ingenue zoom. This is what it's supposed to look like, or would have any time after the Second World War. This is what it looks like when you take the coating off to get that flare out of windows, to make your work look unique. People came away from NAB, and the remark I heard most often that this was the year of glass, this was the year of lenses, because everybody seems to be coming out with cine lenses, geared cine lenses. These are just some, there were far more, I didn't even get to them all, names you've never heard of. For instance, geared cine-style primes and zooms, non-anamorphic, are from all these companies. We used to think, I don't know, Cook, Zeiss, a few others, not anymore. Everyone's in this game. Why are they doing that? That's what I want you to keep in mind. Look at this. Do you remember I said the big frame is taking over? This is Cook's newest series, Series 7, which was just announced at NAB, full frame plus. What does full frame plus mean? That means it has 46.3 millimeter image circle, which is the same as that big red Dragon 8K sensor. And that's not a coincidence. This is the whole series, good-looking lenses. I'm a big Cook fan. This is Ingenue's latest lens. I think it's a 48-130, I believe, and it's the Optimo style. It's light, but what's notable about it is it has a 44 millimeter image circle. In other words, full frame, full frame. This just was announced at NAB. Now, what is this? I don't know. That's what I said when I walked past it. I thought, the LSD was kicking in finally. I don't know. When in Vegas. That's what that is. That was really one of the coolest things. Zeiss got this artist to make these special series of lenses. I don't know who would be caught on the set shooting with something like this, but it would be actually kind of fun. And these are CP2 lenses. Now, the compact prime lenses were still camera lenses that Zeiss rebarreled themselves, put cine-style barrels and gearing on them so they'd be rugged and they would be more appropriate to shooting on a set with gear pulling and all that. They were so successful with CP2 that they've just come out with CP3, and that's what this is right here, and that premiered at the show. It's subtle differences, not massive, but still, they're very, very happy with that. And because they were, lenses originally designed for SLRs, full frame coverage. All the CP 2 and 3 series, full frame coverage. Another little trend are lightweight zooms for Super 35. Here's a couple from Canon. This is a servo. You can put a servo on it if you want. Very familiar. These are brilliant lenses, lightweight. The performance is rather stunning. Fujinon came out with a pair of lenses that are almost the same thing. Super 35. These are all mostly mechanical, but the zoom is mechanical. I think they're all. I'm sorry, I take that back. They're all mechanical. And I've worked with this one and tried this one a little bit. It's brilliant too. This is just for fun. This is this company, SLR Magic. It's, I think, a Hong Kong company. But they put these little things out that they do stuff that nobody else would do. So this is a tiny little anamorphic lens adapter that you put on tiny little, probably micro 4/3 cameras. It's got a 52 millimeter screw on it, thread on it. Imagine that. So the point of this is to tell you that anamorphic is also undergoing a resurgence in a really big way, because all these giant sensors, imagine you have a giant sensor and you have an anamorphic lens. And that's just exciting everybody in the camera business, behind the camera. So this is a cute little thing Canon came up with that I thought was interesting. They've built a little LED light into this 28 millimeter macro lens. I expect to see more stuff. Think about it. It makes total sense. You don't need much power. There is even a little boomlet in lens test projectors, something I know something about. This is my friend Kish Sadavani. I've known him for many years. This is Penis Technic, but this is his work. Look how tiny that is. That's the lens. That's the projector. It's obviously LED. And look, it's got a USB on it. Another company, Dents, came out with almost the same thing. It's called the David. Thank you. And you see it projects. You can check your lens on location. That's really cool. Now, I went over to Fujinon because I wanted to see their 8K lens, because Fujinon's been doing a lot of early work in 8K. They were at the Rio Olympics shooting that in 8K with that big OB van. And I went there, but the lens wasn't there. So where was the lens? I did some detective work, and basically I turned 180 degrees because it was across the hall over at Ikegami had come and gotten the lens and put it on their camera. And this was the camera that they were using at the Olympics last year, too. As you know, the coming Olympics in 2020, is that the next one? So, yes, it's going to be broadcast by NHK, in 8K, they say. So I had to see this. That's a whale of a lens. Now, you might ask, 8K, can they make a Super 35 size sensor that's 8K? Well, yes, they can, because that earlier red camera I showed you, which was an 8K camera, and it said 8K Dragon 8K VV, VistaVision, well, they also make a sensor called Helium, which is available now. In fact, the larger sensor, I'm not sure it's quite available yet, but the small sensor, it's Super 35 8K from Red, but they're not the only ones. This is UHD, so essentially it's 8K, and you'll see the kind of sensor. Because when you're capturing 8K, I don't know that you're going to do it in a smaller sensor than Super 35. That's an important takeaway. Hello. Speaking of. Oh, I don't know what I mean by that. It just struck me as funny. This is the theater. I'm returning us back to the 8K theater. Every year, NHK shows their latest stuff that they've shot in HK. Hello. This you'll find interesting. This was their 8K living room. Okay, fine. I'm going to have an 8K living room if I live long enough. Sure, that's kind of interesting. Look at the size of this. You know, it's like from science fiction movies. But look over here. They're showing the effective frame rate. And I took a picture of this just so you could see it too. At the top is 60 hertz, and you can see that everything here is blurred. Now, everything's not perfectly sharp here either, but it's far less blurred. There's much more distinct detail. And man, you can see it. Every year when I go and look at these demos, I see it every single time, and I can't wait to have 120 hertz myself. I'm not one of those 24p people. So anyway, so I go inside the living room, and this is what it's like to be sitting and watching the screen. This is a side view of the screen. All right, look how thin that is. All right, now we're in the 21st century again. Okay. Hello. Sorry. This is another view of it, just so you can get an idea. They have to tell you that, just in case you don't. It's also interesting that it's hung like a cloth screen. Can you see that it's hung from that rod across the top? You've never seen that before. Now, this is kind of probably some of the tech that went into that. This was also at the 8K area. This is a flexible OLED display. That's kind of interesting. Now, look at the side of that. And they've been working on an outdoors version of this, which is explained over here. But over here, you can see the effects of being outdoors for 155 days. That's what the OLED, the conventional OLED, looked like after 21 days. I'm not sure if it's a UV issue. I don't understand that technology well enough. But apparently, after 155 days, you can see the difference. And in conclusion, just a few notable things. One, this is the most fun booth. This was Vimeo. Lots of balloons. Children like me like balloons. Best furniture, I'd go for this. It's kind of cool. It's at Matthews. Best demo, who can resist? You have to try this. There's all kinds of haptic stuff going on. Yeah. Most aspirational T-shirt. Hardest working security, and this is meant as a kind of a sharp comment. I don't understand the need for this. These guys, by the way, I don't know if you can tell, they have a pistol on both sides of their hips. Now, can you shoot with two hands outside of the movies? A pistol? Are you sure? Okay, then I stand corrected. I just looked at that and had never. Tasers look like pistols? Okay, I stand corrected. Nonetheless, the hardest working security guys, they ran these dogs through the floors numerous times. I'm sure they found stuff. Most likely to. I thought it was kind of cool. And until next year, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. That was excellent. So next up is Marilyn Pierce, Director of Engineering at Fox News, who will talk about automation. Please give Marilyn a big hand.
Thank you, everybody. Yes, automation as far as the eye could see. I've been going to NAB now for about 19 years, and I've seen automation grow a long way from since then to today. But as far as I saw this year, everywhere. I mean, I think I even saw a Jackfield manufacturer was selling his virtual automation Jackfields. It's everywhere. But I won't talk as long as everybody else. I'll be very brief at this because it is my first time to be up here talking, and I hope you will help me get through this. But let's talk about the big iron automations. These are the traditional automations where they control devices only. They don't actually create really any content. They control devices via serial IP or GPI or GPOs. But your traditional, your Harris Communications, I'm sorry, see, I still do it. The Imagine Communications, which is the Louth, which is the Harris, they're still there, they're still big, they're still doing innovation to do the big iron stuff. They still have the ADC and the D series, which I know that many of my fellow master control people here are still using those. Grass Valley, they still support the Colossus in Columbus. They don't have it on the booth anymore, but it's still there. It's still part of the ecosystem that we have to deal with whenever we're working in master control. Pebble Beach, again, big iron, still with Neptune and their Marina products. And of course, Morpheus is still out there. There's many, many more, from the big names to even some of the smaller systems like the inversions. Many, many systems that are out there that have really, really come a long way since that first, I'm going to throw a GPO to do a switcher on a Grass Valley M200 switcher to roll the 2-inch tape. That's where at least that's where I started. Control room automation. This is my first year, to be honest, to look at control room automation, and I was amazed at what they can do. I'm sure early on they were doing iNews, MOS gateways to the ENPS and anything else to pull up the graphics and actually go through the script. But the automation I was seeing now to be able to do real-time news, which is where Fox News is, to do control room, control cameras, robotic cameras and things like that. You were talking about some of the lenses that you were seeing to be able to refocus everything on the fly and change your shots. Quite amazing. Of course, the Ross Overdrive is still the industry leader that I've seen on there, and I've got the Grass Valley Ignite and plus some of the smaller ones. This is not going to be an exhaustive list at all. For transmission, you still got your crystals that are doing GPIs and GPOs and automated baseball switches to do for the high power amplifiers and such, and your Gates Air, which again, another Harris transmitter product, which started early on with some of the solid state transmitters and had built-in power level for day of air for broadcasters in call letter markets. One of the things about the big iron that I see is they're trying to morph into the future. And one of the things that these don't do at this time is do any content creation of its own. It's only controlling other systems. Your graphics are coming from another device, which this will trigger and air and switch and make things happen that way. But they're morphing into small iron automation. This is your automation doing the original channel in a box. It's doing off the COTS, the consumer off-the-shelf hardware, doing its own origination and rendering on the fly. Couple of stories I'll digress here. Again, not an exhaustive list. I mean, almost everybody who was anybody from traffic companies to control rooms to everybody was doing some kind of COTS here. But I remember early on in my career, at least starting out after I got out of the jail, No, I wasn't in the jail. I'll be honest. I was working in the jail. But at PBS, in one of my former lives, they had basically a syndication model. I mean, they were not allowed to actually produce any content, so they would have the content available so that member stations could meet at the top of the hour, do the no commercial feed, and then go off and do their local thing. But around the early 90s to mid 90s, they decided to create an actual channel. A channel that stations could put up overnight whenever they didn't have any operations, to help save money. They actually built this system on a Macintosh. So a gentleman, a great friend of mine named Steve Shield there, created what he called the golden Macintosh. He would actually record the content, AVI files, and then he would record them, the commercials, the promos, the underwriters for this channel, and it ran on this single Macintosh for 5 years. Nonstop. And that was the early 90s. Then we move on to the more small iron. I remember, again, still at PBS, seeing the first ITX kind of on the back of a booth running off of COTS hardware again. The first time we actually see the actual channel in a box with its potential. Now, I know it's had a rough history. Channel in box has come a long, long way. And it's going to continue. It's even better now. I was seeing the broad streams, the newcomers to the market in this, actually pushing this to the edge where content is being rendered free of automation control from a central playlist out to the edge and create graphics. Everything is finally coming over here. And I think it's more because the hardware is catching up to the promise. So I hope it continues. I think it'll help keep a lot of us relevant that's doing actual linear channel and even a channel in the box and even doing our own VOD and helping people use YouTube to create their own channels and such. Moving on. One of the reasons that I think this is happening is everybody is doing workflow automation. Service-oriented apps, the maturity of BXF, which SMPTE helped sponsor in that, which is, thank you very much. But I think they're going to leapfrog the service-oriented apps with microservices. They'll actually leapfrog BXF to be able to have traffic systems talk directly to the automation and the on-air product through either the APIs, through other means. But it would not have happened, and nobody would be comfortable without it, without the BXF work that we had done here at SMPTE. Finally, there's an appetite, at least I've seen in the industry, at least where I've been, and also in the vendors, to be willing to run channels that are hands-off. The idea that you could actually have a channel in the cloud or on a channel in a box, whether it's remote or sensory, where you don't need operations folks to actually do the actual pushing the button to switch the brakes. And I'm coming from a news environment where everything is live 18 hours a day. Now, the operations folks that do this are still around. They're doing playlist manipulation. They're doing content ingest. They're doing quality control, all the things where human eyes are better at doing than the automated processes that are happening within the system. The leaders of the industry, the vice presidents, the senior vice presidents, have been using ERP systems for quite a while now. They've been able to automate their business workflows, and they're wondering now, why can't we do that in our day-to-day operations? That's one of the reasons why the workflow automation is now coming down into the master control area, and actually, it's not quite there yet, but it's being explored. Everybody is hoping to take advantage of what they learn from that and bring this into the operation thing. The newsroom systems are finally getting proven. ESPN, Fox Sports 1 have all been using control room automation with great success. So that's one of the reasons that's been able to come into more of a workflow. So the producers are actually sitting and building their shows before the show airs, and instead of doing rundowns and stuff, they're actually building what the automation is going to do, the playlist, the graphics, and everything, and they can preview it. They can actually preview a show long before it airs. Great thing. And then, of course, it brings the scalability and flexibility we've always talked about. We've always wanted to be able to launch a channel, in a few hours' notice, take it down, repurpose it, regraphic, reband it, anywhere we want to do. I've been able to take some of these ideas and do it with our international broadcast at Fox News. So I think that's finally coming into its own, and it's all because of the marriage of the work that SMPTE did with BXF to actually exchange that information and be able to build the playlist and manipulate it without human intervention. They can even come in and build it the way they do. Sorry, I'm getting into this. Last slide, I told you I'd be short. The new directions that I see going into here, where microservices are gaining ground. I really want to specifically talk about the Xenium platform that Imagine Communications is coming out with. It's not really innovative so much in what they're doing, but it's the way they're going about it. They're opening up the platform for third-party vendors to build their own microservices. They'll qualify them and all that, but instead of the big iron or the small iron automation companies actually owning the entire driver base, they're allowing other companies to come in, build that so that they can do what they do best. Nielsen can build their own little microservice that'll come in and add the Nielsen markings. Closed captioning can come in. EEG is taking advantage of that. And that's a big turnaround in the industry to where they'll let go some of that control that they've been held accountable for, or for better or for worse, been able to do what they need to do. Templating, the idea that you have a set look for either a channel, a show, a day part, can be built in deep layers instead of just, for this time I want this ticker, or I want this logo, I want this. We actually go very deep into talking about not only the look and feel of it, but the bumps, the roll-ins, things like that. Instead of just having almost like a 2 or 3 layer template, they can go much deeper. And they're actually taking advantage of that and building those on the fly. Companies or former companies like VDS being able to work with actually reading the automation and reading iNews and manipulating the playlist without anybody touching it to build these templates and use those business-based rules to make this happen. I know automation is not a very exciting thing sometimes. It's not like production or everything, but it's actually coming in on its own. It's actually coming into the business practices, and it's going to be a very important part of whether it's going to be a video on demand solution or a linear channels, or even on the fly from a consumer base. Everything moving to the edge, coming back to the center, and back and forth. So I hope that was helpful. Sorry, as I said, I didn't have much. That's my last slide. And if you have questions, I'll be around. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. That was terrific. Next up is Mark Schubin.
I'm very disappointed that David didn't get the suit for me. As usual, feel free to take notes if you want to, certainly on things that I say, but the slides are already available online. Sorry, I should back up a little. This was NAB's theme this year, the Met Effect. So what is the Met Effect? I work at the Metropolitan Opera. In New York, we also have the Metropolitan Museum. There's a hardware and lumber place where I shop called the Met. There's Mr. Met. If you go to London, there's the Met Office that does the weather, and the Met is the Metropolitan Police Service. But NAB decided that they have a Met Effect. It's media, entertainment, and technology. And those lines that you see, they actually had a wall with strings, and you were supposed to connect the strings according to the way that you deal with media, entertainment, and technology. And what this had to do with media, entertainment, and technology, I'm not sure, but the first column was, what do you drink in the morning? And choices were coffee and orange juice and milk and so on, and somebody used his entire string to connect coffee to orange juice and milk. I think this was the whatever show. And I don't mean this in a pejorative way. It's not whatever. It was the first show in a long time where you could do whatever you wanted. You could be whatever you wanted. So here's a brief history of NAB shows. The National Association of Radio Broadcasters was created in Chicago in 1922, and they had their first convention at the Hotel Commodore in New York the next year. 23 people showed up, no exhibits. They were all radio broadcasters. 1941, they had the first exhibits in St. Louis at the Hotel Jefferson. And then in 1956, they had the introduction of the VTR. They changed from the National Association of Broadcasters to the National Association of Radio and Television Broadcasters. They went back to NAB after that. But that introduction of the VTR changed things. Now the NAB show was no longer just for broadcasters because there could be post houses. And so there were people coming to the NAB show who were interested in something that wasn't necessarily what the broadcasters were interested in. And then there were these imperatives. In 1954, you had to go color. In 1982, you had to go teletext. Not everybody did. 1984, you had to go stereo sound. 1986, you had to go digital. 1996, you had to go HD. 2010, you had to go stereoscopic 3D. Not everybody did that one either. So here was last year. You had to go IP. SDI is dead. There were booths that had big signs. SDI is dead. You had to go 4K. HD is not good enough. You had to go high dynamic range, and you could only go high dynamic range for 4K. There was no other way to do high dynamic range. You had to go wide color gamut, but that was part of HDR. You had to go to virtual reality. You had to be on social media. This year, it was all options. Yeah, you could go IP, you could be SDI. If you look over at the right, there are the Best of Show Awards, and TV Technology gave out 78 Best of Show Awards, but 2 of the 78, one of them was for SDI Patch Bay, and the other one was for an IP transport platform. You could go 4K or you could be HD. You could be HDR or you could be SDR, and guess what? HDR works just fine on HD. Wide color gamut, totally optional. Virtual reality, great if you want to be in that business. Don't want to be in that business? That's fine. Social, it's its own media business. You don't have to be in it if you're a broadcaster. If you want to, that's fine. There were also broadcast TV issues, evolutions that became revolutions, machine learning, which I prefer to artificial intelligence. If it's intelligence, it's intelligence. What's artificial about it? A lot of stuff about displays, and then the silly and scary. So, you want to go IP. Here was this IP interoperability area where everybody could show that they were interoperable according to the draft standards. And are they the last of the standards? We don't know yet. How many IP routers do you need for live TV? This is a patch bay. There is no such thing as a patch bay in IP. If your router goes down, your router goes down. Now, there's all kinds of things about self-healing and things like that, but if you were going live, I would recommend having 2 routers. And there are a lot of people doing IP who have 2 routers now. Here's another thing from the Met effect. This is 4K. This is astronauts on the International Space Station being transmitted live in 4K to NAB. Can anyone tell from this picture if it's 4K? And here's a little GIF of them playing space pong. Can anyone tell from this picture if it's 4K? David, when he was talking about the cameras, said on one of the cameras, and of course it's 4K. Well, I'm not so sure about that, of course. If it's a single sensor camera, and that 8K camera that he showed is a single sensor camera, then the red and the blue, if it's a 4K sensor, are HD, period. They're 2K. The green is sort of 4K, but it's a quincunx 4K, which means if you have diagonals that happen to go where those white lines are, well, then it's diagonally HD as well. There are 4K cameras. Sony, Ikegami, and Grass Valley have true 4K cameras with 3 4K sensors in them. But the large sensor, single sensor ones are not necessarily 4K. If you go to enough resolution, you go to an 8K sensor, yeah, you can derive 4K out of that, no problem. To the right of that, I have an image taken from NHK's booth where they were showing what the modulation transfer function, or how much contrast you get out of the 8K camera. And if you notice the red curve, it goes down to the bottom at 8K resolution. So an 8K camera gives you 0 contrast at 8K. Gives you about 50% at 4K, which is not bad. It's a lot better than a 4K camera, which gives you 0 at 4K. And certainly better than an HD camera, which gives you 0 at HD. So things to consider. Contrast is a significant thing. Here was a camera that was labeled as 12K. But it turned out it wasn't a camera, it was 3 cameras. 3 cameras that called themselves 4K cameras. But here was a 4K up converter. And I don't know if you can tell which side of the screen is 4K. I can't remember. Here are 2 screens. This is at the harmonic booth, and the one at the left is definitely on the soft side. The one on the right looks quite a bit sharper. And if you look at the upper left corner of each screen, it tells you what it's showing. So the one on the left is 480, the one on the right is 540, and substantially sharper than the 480. This was another part of the harmonic booth, and now, as I mentioned, you can have HDR with UHD, or you can have HDR with HD. And it's HDR in either case, except what is HDR? And there seemed to be HDR camps, and I'm not talking here on a technical basis. On a technical basis, Dolby hates Samsung, and Samsung hates Dolby. But both of them were showing their HDR as, ooh, look, HDR is brighter. And that's one way of thinking about HDR, but it's not the way that a lot of people are talking about HDR. A lot of people are talking about HDR as being a basic picture where the speculars go brighter. And so on the right side, the left monitor is the only monitor I saw walking the entire show that seemed to be properly set up for HDR. And you can't quite tell from this monitor, but it was really stunning when you saw it. It was like, wow, looking through a window. The lights were really bright. But the people look pretty much the same as the SDR monitor, which is to its right. And then down below that, Tektronix had a new measuring system for HDR, and one of the functions that it does is it can show you where you're going above normal SDR, and so that's kind of the zebra stripe or crosshatch that you're seeing there. That's where the picture is above SDR, and that's as it should be. The speculars are high, the rest of the picture is normal. If we don't do something like that, then we're going to be in big trouble because nobody's going to know how HDR should be looked at. This is something that came out after NAB. It says the virtual reality content business that isn't. I disagree. And here's something with April numbers from Pornhub. 2,600 plus videos in virtual reality, 500,000 views a day. So there is a business to be had in VR. It's not necessarily your business, but there is a business. This is one of those cameras, an inside-out camera, to use Chris's term. It's the Yi Halo camera. It's the one that Google uses for their jump. Yeah, okay, you know, as you heard, there are many, many cameras like this on the show floor. But this was new this year. This kind of camera. Yi had a version of it on the left there. They call it the 360 VR. Ricoh was showing this thing called the Theta. There were other manufacturers, LG, some others. The idea is this is a 360-degree camera. It's got a view out each side and a very distorting lens. And then software undistorts it. And you get a 360-degree view from that little tiny thing that you're holding there. This is something that came from the consumer world, the Lume Cube, 1500 lumen light. It's 1.5 cubic inches, 60-degree throw, total Bluetooth control or manual, waterproof to 100 feet. Quite a little device. This was Canon's immersive theater, and I shot this from outside. I didn't want to disturb the people. But you'll see that they are not wearing any glasses, they're not wearing any goggles, they're basically lying down and looking at a dome. But that's one way of getting immersion. This was a more typical kind of VR where people are wearing goggles, except they're also sitting in pods that twist and turn and rock back and forth, and there's a big line of people wanting to get on those. But this was the most interesting VR platform to me. You see the guy lying down. He's wearing VR goggles. He can tilt himself one way or another, and those things that his hands are attached to are actually flaps, and you can take a flight through Times Square, and as you lose altitude, you can flap to get higher. And quite remarkable. Can we see the video on that? This is not a VR company, it's a modeling company. And, there you go, the PLW. So they model cities and other places. Oh, not running? Oh, okay. So this is their model of Chicago. The softness is just the way that I captured it. It's a fully high def or beyond high def model. The people who are flying through Times Square could see dirty newspapers on the street and doorways with strange stains on them and so on. Thank you. So, back to the slides. Okay. Maybe one more. This is where the ATSC 3.0 pavilion was last year. This year, it's Facebook Live. So there's like 30 companies that are exhibiting as part of Facebook Live, and only Facebook Live. And then just inside, as you heard before, was Google and their YouTube stuff. But it's good when there's no longer an ATSC 3.0 pavilion. It means that ATSC 3.0 is now normal stuff. They don't need to have their own pavilion. So this gets us into Broadcast and Associates. You may know John Lyon all the way at the right. He won the TV Engineering Award this year. He's working on the antennas on top of the #1 World Trade Center, which have been delayed because of the tremendous wind that we've been having. Now, after NAB, Sinclair announced that it wants to purchase Tribune. And if they do, they will end up with 223 stations in 108 markets, including 39 of the top 50. And Sinclair is hot to trot on ATSC 3.0. So previously there was this big question, how are we going to do it? We don't have the FCC giving out a second channel. We don't have the FCC buying you a receiver. How do we switch to 3.0? And the theory is, some broadcaster in the market will carry everyone's signals while everyone else transitions to 3.0, and then they'll carry that broadcaster's signals. Didn't seem a realistic thing. But with this Sinclair purchase, it becomes potentially more realistic. It's something that Sinclair could do by itself. Repack, it's an issue for broadcasters. This is squeezing all the broadcast channels into a smaller frequency range, but it also affects wireless mics because now we have much fewer frequencies. And so there was a lot at the show with people showing wireless mic systems that are going to work with Repack. And one of the most interesting to me was the Altaros GTX. It's an ultra-wideband system in the 6.5 gigahertz range and will handle 24 transmitters and is actually bidirectional. It's an Audio-Technica company. So where does evolution become revolution? At the upper left there is a drone, maybe the largest drone at the show, I'm not sure. There are larger drones. The one down at the bottom is a taxi service that's coming to Dubai. You get into the drone and it flies you where you want to go. But the smallest drone at the show, and there were some smaller ones, but they didn't have cameras in them, is the stuff on the right. It's called Dobby from Zerotech, and it folds up into this thing about the size of glasses case, and then the arms come out and the rotors come out from there. And this drone that costs $349 has, and there's some dispute on this, I've looked at the comments on the web, GPS tracking, pattern tracking, centroid tracking, so if you want to follow a particular car or something, it'll follow that, and facial recognition. Follow this guy in the cocktail party. And can we see the video on that now? So this is just some of the dances that have been done with this drone. That's at the History of Zerotech. And they did some dancing at the show. So that's December 2015 with these drones. May of 2016. CCTV in this case is China Central Television. The Alibaba Festival, that's like Amazon Festival if there were such a thing. This is pattern recognition that it's using. There's a pattern recognition floor under that. And this is the recognition of the particular dancers. So each drone is following a dancer. $350. Buy it now. Okay, back to the slides. The evolution revolution continues. VNova Perseus 2, it's a compression codec, 300 kilobits per second for HD. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, CNN. I saw this story and it said, hey, visual processors in CNN, next generation supercomputer. Wow, CNN's doing something interesting. No, CNN in this case stands for convolutional neural nets. And Atomos had big price drops and size increases, and they're sort of approaching evolution revolution. But let's take a look at the artificial intelligence or machine learning. Here is a travel shot, and the system from Valossa, which is a Finnish company, recognizes that there's a temple in the shot and recognizes that of these three people, two are male and one is female. Here's a little bit trickier, but same system. It recognizes Justin Timberlake and Christopher Walken. It recognizes the bottle of Bai, and it listens and says, oh, it's a particular commercial for Bai saying there's no artificial sweeteners. Or this one where it recognizes Paul McCartney and Bruce Springsteen, recognizes that they're in front of the drums, and can tell the music that's being played. So pretty fast for finding things using this kind of system. On the other hand, here is another system that was very proudly discussed at NAB from FlySwipe. It uses the camera on your TV to tell who's watching. So it doesn't do a kids commercial if there are only adults in the room. It doesn't do a commercial for feminine products if there are only men in the room, and so on. A lot of people got out their tape as soon as they heard this. And there's Atomos, and I don't know if you're familiar with their old prices, but they're coming down. But the bottom right, a 19-inch monitor, high dynamic range, and built-in 4K recorder. Displays, lots of display stuff at the show. The Brother Air Scouter WD-330C, another thing that's come from the consumer world. The original Air Scouter was introduced in 2010, so 7 years ago, but this one has an SDI input, HD, it makes a virtual image so that you're looking at a very large screen at a decent distance. And then there was the Kinomo Hypervision, display devices, Hunan Yestech optoelectronic, and Sony with acoustic surface technology and canvas. So let's look at those. This is Kinomo's system. They call it holographic. There is nothing holographic about it, but you can see that kind of windmill at the upper right. Those are bars of LEDs. And when it spins, they make a video image, and it looks like it's floating in thin air. The little creases that you see on some of the ones on the bottom, that's just an artifact of my shooting it. You didn't see any of those creases when you were looking with your eye. This was great. This company called Display Devices, and the right side you can see these big motors, and then in the front there's this thing with lots of bolts on it and a big dome and everything. Well, everything they do is for video display. So what's the bolt and dome for? Well, this is in the back of it, and steam comes out, and they can project on the steam, and they can control where the steam appears, and so you can get a 3D image without any glasses. Yeah, very cool. This is Hunan Yestech Optoelectronic, just to show that video walls don't have to be flat. They can be round, those cylinders you see at the bottom right, or any kind of curves or something like that. This is a Sony display using what they call acoustic surface technology. It actually emits the sound, and it moves so little that it doesn't bother your view at all, and the sound's actually not half bad. And then this was just a wow thing in the Sony booth. It's called Canvas. Sony has gotten into the video wall business, but very high resolution and high dynamic range. And they were showing some knockout footage from Carnival in Brazil that was just amazing. And then we have this, which was probably the silliest thing at the show. It's a robot that projects video wherever you want, does it autonomously, and comes back to charge itself up. But it's up to 250 lumens, which means it's less than 100 nits for a 55-inch image on a flat white screen, and has a 3-hour battery life at maximum output, which means you're not even going to get a night's worth of television watching out of it. But can we see the video on that? So after you set it up, it pulls itself off of its docking station. Yeah, it's about a foot high in the current configuration, and you'll see it gets higher. And there it goes. It lifts itself up, and it's got its little projector. And if that's where you want to watch television, and then when you're all done watching television, it folds itself back up, and it finds its way back to the docking station, and it charges itself up again. Oh. Back to the slides, please. So that was the silly, and here's the scary. First one is this Cadillac with not only that very large crane on it, but there's a second crane in the back. And anytime anyone touched anything, the pictures bounced up and down because, hey, it's a car. It's on tires. This is from the Copper Development Association, also known as the Copper Alliance, who want to remind you that lightning can strike anywhere. And so there's a 3-phase disconnect, but it's from a company that did have a big grounding strap, and so none of their equipment was destroyed, only the disconnect. And how is this going to happen to you? Well, there's FEMA, and they said, it's not if, it's when. And this was a person that I saw at the Kino Flow booth, and she allowed me to shoot her hair, which was the same color as their lamps. Again, a PDF available at bit.ly/SMPTE-NY-NAB17. Thank you. You assume the position?
All right, thank you very much, Mark. So now is the Q&A part. Will the panelists assume the position on the table in their respective titles, with a card title? Unfortunately, we are running quite late. I would like to wrap up the session at about 8:30, so we don't keep our hosts late, so there's very limited time for Q&A. So if you're called upon, you get one question, no follow-up, and just state your name and company name. Our SMPTE volunteers are coming up with the wireless mics, so that, and please talk into the mic so that our streaming audience can hear you. So I don't have the mic, so I think they're coming from the projection booth. So while we're waiting for the mics, do we have? There's one there. Do we have our first question? Here comes a mic. We're getting ready for a question here.
Jonathan Abrams, Nutmeg. Jonathan Abrams, Nutmeg.
Okay, go ahead.
If Dolby and Samsung have an us versus them relationship, is HDR10 plus Samsung open sourcing the equivalent of Dolby Vision? What's happening with that, and how does HDR10 plus change what any networks or display manufacturers or anyone else is doing?
Well, there are lots of different ways of doing HDR, not just Dolby Vision and HDR10 or HDR10 Plus or HLG or S-Log3 or any of the others. It is possible to convert one to another. There are different reasons why you might choose one or another. The Dolby Vision system maps to actual light outputs. The HLG system, for example, instead is more oriented to what you see on a waveform monitor, where you don't know what the display is going to be putting out. It's more of a political issue in terms of the different systems, but it's a big issue in terms of no one deciding yet how HDR should be implemented. Should it be just the speculars? Should it be this brighter thing? How do you deal with SDR displays? Last year, those of you who were here may have seen what I showed from ISO Video, Keith Slavin's company, who has really wonderful HDR to SDR conversion and automatic and preserving the local contrast. But is that going to be in TVs? We don't know. So lots of questions at this point.
I think it's also important to recognize that Samsung's HDR10 Plus is metadata. It's dynamic metadata. So while Dolby and Samsung are kind of at odds as to which system should be adopted, Dolby also recognizes that this is kind of validation that dynamic metadata has value, so that you can change the tone mapping on a scene-by-scene or frame-by-frame basis, which will improve that picture quality for HDR. So I know Samsung, they have the HDR10 Plus in their TVs now. They want to try and bring this to a broader ecosystem so that others can create content in it. Content can flow through the whole production chain and delivery platforms, and I think perhaps even for other manufacturers to adopt it as well. I'm actually going to be helping them put together an event that will talk about that whole HDR10 and 10 Plus ecosystem out in Hollywood in about a month or so. So stay tuned.
Thank you. Next question. Raise your hand if you have a question.
Well, while the audience thinks, I will add something. You heard Chris when he was talking earlier about the Panasonic dual panel providing 1,000,000 to 1 contrast ratio and 2,000 nits. I'd like to see 1,000,000 to 1 contrast ratio in a real-world viewing environment. I don't see how it can be done. You have 2,000 nits, and you have somebody wearing a white shirt in the audience. Some of that is bouncing off the white shirt, coming back to the screen. How do you get 1,000,000 to 1? 1,000,000 to 1 is 0.002 nits for a 2,000 nit display.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Mark. And in theatrical, like Dolby and Barco have done a lot of studies about this specifically. And you're right, just normal, even in a darkened theater environment, reflections off of people's faces can ruin that. And they proved this with measurements.
Chris,
Yeah.
you were
Sorry,
talking,
state your name and company, please. What is your name and affiliation?
Matthew Brennisholtz from Brennisholtz Consulting, I guess. Used to be Insight Media. Anyway, you were talking about light field displays and gigapixel type displays. How realistic is a gigapixel display as a way of delivering consumer entertainment at any level, whether it's IMAX down through your cell phone?
That's the big challenge, and that's why you need some form of encoding or compression, because you can't deliver that level. You've got to find different ways of doing that. And so, their concept, and I think this is probably going to be the reality of how this is delivered, is it can't be 30 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 video images. It's going to have to be a model the way a game engine works. It's a model with textures, which is much more bandwidth efficient. But you've got to add extra layers on top of that, like materials properties, as I mentioned earlier. But it's still a lot of data.
Yeah. Well, there are the two issues. One is
Speak into the microphone, please.
There are the two issues. One is transmitting it, then yes, I can see how compression and sparse arrays, yada, yada, yada. But the display, is there some realistic way to get away from a gigapixel physical display that'll show that many pixels and that many angles?
Well, as you know, there's, well, first of all, I don't know what Lightfield Labs is doing. But as you know, spatial light modulators is probably the most likely way, a near-term way to get anything close to a light field or a holographic display. And you still have to have physical pixels to write something, whether it's a hologram or some kind of an image. And the physical spacing, the size of those things is just, it's limited. So yeah, it's going to require, I think, very different approaches, very different technology. And I'd be very curious to see what Lightfield Labs has up their sleeve.
Is there another question?
I could.
Yes.
Am I on? Can you hear me?
I think so.
Our cameras today capture from 14 to 16 and a half stops. Those are nice round numbers. They don't really mean anything, but they can you hear me? Yes. Okay, I can't hear myself. They capture what HLG and the other PQ and the other types of high dynamic range schemes are trying to capture on the display side. Camera-wise, we're already there. We're capturing these wide, very wide dynamic ranges now. You can think of HLG, which was, I think, co-developed by BBC and NHK, and it's part of the NHK's 8K satellite casting that they're doing right now. I think it's 10-bit, I'm not sure. That's what they told me. But they're incorporating that now because they needed it as a way to take what the cameras can capture, compress it down, and then display it properly and automatically. Today, I take what I shoot, and I shoot everything at least in S-Log3, let's say, and I go into DaVinci Resolve, and I have to squeeze that down into what I know the display can capture. And I often take the highlights, and the highlights have a different gamma than the midtones, and I play all of those games. It takes a lot of work. If I were shooting with HLG, I would take a camera that was an HLG camera, and it would encode the metadata necessary for high dynamic range display. Then if you were watching it on a HLG display, it would unpack that, decode that, display it properly. It's as if S-Log3 were being shown properly on a display without having to go into DaVinci Resolve. which from a broadcaster's point of view makes a lot of sense. The other PQ and all of that, Hollywood is and Dolby seems to be more interested in that. That requires some post, I think, right?
Well, everything either requires post or a different philosophy of shooting. You're not going to get any free ride. So if you think that you're going to go to an HDR display and get the proper look of what your camera captured, first there's the question of what is the proper look. If you shot outdoors, there's stuff that's way beyond 2,000 nits or way beyond 4,000 nits. So what's proper? What should it be? But the bigger issue to me is what's the viewer doing? Is there a light on in the room? That has now wiped out most of your dynamic range. Where is the light? What color is the light? All of those things are affecting what you're seeing, and if your picture isn't robust enough to handle viewers doing that kind of thing, then you've got nothing. So my feeling about HDR at the moment, at least, is by all means shoot HDR exactly as you're talking about, and then go into something like Keith Slavin's box and create an SDR image out of it.
My kind of reply would be, it's not a perfect world. It can't be and it never will be.
Mm-hmm.
So if I look at my HDR set and I'm watching the Olympics in 2020 and it seems to pop in a way it doesn't now because the speculars are coming through, I'm probably happy with that regardless of whether my dark detail is washed out because I'm wearing a white shirt and I'm standing this far away. You see what I'm saying?
But if you're
Or my windows are
if
all
you're
open.
doing a drama where the murderer is lurking in the shadows and your dark detail has gone
Fair
away,
enough.
there goes your murderer.
Fair enough, but for shooting sports is always going to want to be in the moment and immediate. So there can't be any intermediary steps. You shoot it, it goes up to the satellite, the whole world sees it immediately. It's live, and you understand live.
I understand live very
Yeah,
well.
so that's going to be something like HLG, don't you think?
As I pointed out, well, let me go back to your thing first.
Okay.
You pointed out how large NAB was. In all of those halls, in all of those exhibits, with all of those monitors, I found one that was set up properly for showing speculars in HDR. Inside a truck.
One of the takeaways I had from NAB was, I think it's almost every piece of equipment I looked at could do conversions from various flavors of HDR to SDR. All of them could support, almost all of them can support PQ, HLG, and a lot of them are supporting S-Log now. So the bottom line is, in production, everyone wants to be versatile. You can shoot in any of those formats and output to SDR and HDR in various formats.
But what does the viewer see?
Well, that's a different question.
That's the business we're in.
Yeah.
All right, people, we are out of time. I'll squeeze in one more last quick question, and then we have to wrap it up.
One comment on the HDR, Dolby Vision versus HDL is Dolby Vision was developed by Dolby for Dolby Cinema, where the viewing environment is very well controlled, extremely well controlled. And, it was developed by a cinema company for the cinema, while HDL was developed by BBC and NHK, two television companies, for television where the viewing environment is not as well controlled. So, each HDR system has its place, but in the television world, probably HDL is a better choice.
HLG.
Okay, well, that wraps it up. Ted, can we have the last slide, please? And people, please give a round of applause to Chris, David, Marilyn, and Mark. Thank you very much. Visit the SMPTE-NY website. You'll be receiving an email probably by the end of this week announcing the June meeting, as Jeff mentioned. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Most appreciated. Thank you.